All right, so today we are going to review object-oriented programming. Um, it's going to be pretty interactive, um, though I am going to make sure to keep like a good flow of building up the program and writing code. So there might be times where I just drive the bus to build the pieces that we need. But the goal here is very much to discuss and review things. So please do ask questions about stuff that we're going to review and build. And the goal is this morning to get as far as we can, I think, and I hope through all of this. And even better, if we can get to writing a little bit of tests, I think that would be awesome. Um, on these school interfaces exercise. And just to kind of give you all a preview of what these look like, let's just take a quick look at part one. And this looks kind of similar to what we've been doing. We're going to write an OOP program in Python to have a command line program to manage students and staff at a school. So we're going to have this sort of command line input where you can choose these different options to list all the students, view an individual student by ID, add a student, remove a student, quit the program. We're going to have data. And each of these does have a full walkthrough. I will be mostly following along. There are going to be some differences in how I implement. The other thing we'll add is because there's also staff, when we get to this point, we'll add staff. So that's what we're going to build. And I'll walk through this in a minute, but kind of any questions about the game plan? Cool. So what I always do, and this is specifically for the assessment that's coming up, what you all should do is make sure you take the time, read through the README. We're going to be giving you a lot of very specific instructions and notes. Look at if there's CSV files that you need to work with, look at those. If there are tests, actually read the tests. Take some time to look at everything. For instance, if I look at these .csv files, and this is just a text file, right? Separated by commas. GitHub just does some very nice formatting. I see what information a staff member has. And if I look over here, I see what information a student has. And this tells me kind of, all right, I'm going to want to make the student class. I'm probably a staff class. And it tells me what instance attributes I'm going to want on those things. Also, there's something that we should probably maybe update in this assignment, where if I look at the students, I see there's this property named school ID. And because I also looked at the staff and I saw that they had staff ID, I know that the intent here is for this to be a student ID. We're not going to worry now about like students attending multiple schools, right? So that's my interpretation of what this is. This is a student ID. Not like the ID of the school to which the student is going to. A great stretch goal for this project could be thinking about dealing with multiple schools, but we're not going to worry about that too much today. So I've looked through my code, I've looked through my data, and I have it here as well. And in fact, this is probably the best place to look at it. And in fact, I think I'll close these out now. And let's bring this back off to the side. And I've kind of, I cloned it and I did add this classes directory because we are going to put some code there. But this is our project setup, just to show everyone. And is this font size good for everyone on the VS Code?
Zoom in one more, please, if you would.
You got it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
How's that?
Good for me, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you all. So I've looked through my code, and let's clear. I can see I'm in this directory here, review, and we can see the files in this directory, and I've opened VS Code here so that in the file explorer, it's here. And really, so this is the root directory of our project. And you can tell that because readme.md is here. I just put the readme file here really for reference. I'm not gonna be looking at it too much, especially as it has the tutorial that we're going to build. But again, you absolutely should be reading these through in full, and taking notes as you go. And we've got runner PY, and I've added some notes here that I'm gonna talk about in a minute. And runner PY already has a little bit of code in it. We're importing school, we're creating a school, the school has a name, right? I'm gonna make a little bit of a modification because I want my school to live in this classes directory that I made as well. But this is a good start. So this is our project layout. This is the root directory of our project. And runner PY is sort of like our main file that we run everything from. And as we get into importing and executing stuff like that, our paths will all sort of be relative or in reference to. So what I've gone ahead and done, and this is what I do whenever I program, is make a game plan. It's sort of like what people call pseudocoding. Basically, before I start writing code, I want to think about what I want to do. Sort of like being able to time travel and pair program with yourself. Like now that I've made the map and the game plan, I can just focus on writing the code. And this might take you like an hour for the assessment, but it's time well spent because it's much more productive than when you sit down to code. So our game plan is we're going to create a simple student class, school class, excuse me, a simple student class. Then we're going to want to write the code to import all of the students from that CSV file into our program. I make a bunch of students. And once I get all of that working, then I'm going to deal with the staff because this is probably going to be really similar to students. So then I'll make a staff class. I'll import all the staff from the CSV file into our program. Then I'll tackle the command line program. Then, since we've been talking about inheritance, I can already see that with student and with staff, there's a lot of stuff in common. So maybe we're going to want to make a user class that they can both inherit from. And then I'll refactor those classes to actually use a user class. And hopefully, I think we'll be able to get to that point today, this morning rather. I would love to write some tests as well. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get there this morning. If people are interested, that is something that potentially we could do this afternoon, but we'll play it by ear. So again, this is incredibly helpful because this is going to be my game plan when coding. And there's very much a concept of separating design and implementation or design and construction when writing code. And it can happen in big chunks or little chunks. Let me just check in and see if folks have any questions. All right, let's do it. So a lot of this I'll be talking, but then I will be kind of calling on folks for help sometimes as we do stuff. So first off, I got to create a school class. So I'm going to go here in classes and I'll just use the touch command on the command line and I'll say touch classes school.py. And let's do code classes school.py. And I think what I'm going to do is do a split and try to keep the runner here on the right all the time. We might run out of real estate, but I think this might help with consistency and sort of organization with the screens. And I'm going to stick a docstring comment here just to say that this is the school class and whatever else I may want to add later. I'm not going to worry about it too much. And we know that we need a dunder init method. One of these days, I'll figure out how to change my VS Code so it doesn't give the Python type hints. And I know from runner PY that school should have a name. So let's go ahead and give it a name. And we're not going to do much with these yet. But eventually, I want my school to hold a list of all the students and all the staff. And in fact, we can just say students. And we can just say staff. So I'm not doing much with these now, and I've made a to-do comment to myself to come back to it later, but this is the basics of my school. And I think once we build everything out, we can add getters and setters if people are interested. I think I want to save that as icing on the cake to focus on the core stuff. And can someone help me out? Now that I've written this school class, I'm still getting this red squiggly over here saying that import school cannot be resolved. How can I fix that? How can I correctly import school into runner.py. Brandon, yes, sir. I see both Brandons.
Well, which Brandon?
Yeah, I see a lot of folks. Awesome. You know what? I'll just run down the list for the next rounds of questions. I love it. So Brandon Y, if you can kick it off, and Brandon N, you'll be next, and then Chris after that. Just I'm just going by the order that I see it in the list.
Oh, you would just go, you have to go into the correct directory. So you have to do classes dot, or classes spelled with two S's.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, runner py, right? This is sort of relative to runner py. Runners in the same directory as classes. So I need to go inside the classes directory, or Python thinks of it as a module. And then inside this school.py, which Python also thinks of as a module, and then we import school. And Brandon N, actually, I don't want to print school.name. I just want to print school. Can you remind me, like, what do I have to add to my school class to make that happen? So I can see something
Either
nice on the
either
screen.
either a dunder string or dunder represent.
Yeah, totally. And let's do a dunder repper, because it's more flexible. Because like, if one day we do have a bunch of schools and they're all on a list, dunder repper will print out that information of all those schools in the list. And let's just go ahead and return school.name. And my apologies, that should be self. And this should give us now the name for our school. Awesome. And we're off to the races. And so I actually already taken care of step one here. Step two, making a simple student class. And so let me go ahead and create the file. Let's do touch classes student.py. And let me go ahead and open it up here. And Chris, could you maybe walk me through the creation of this student class? And our goal here is I just want a student class that can hold this information about a student: name, age, role, school ID, and password.
So would it be a class student?
Yep, totally.
Yep. And then the initial function
Yep,
with self and then name, age, role, and school ID and
yep,
password. Okay.
exactly. Love it. School ID and password. And then what's the last step I want to do here to take this home?
Self dot name. Would it be underscore name equals name, or does it?
Great question. When do we want to put an underscore in front of name? Yes, sorry, go ahead, man.
Okay, when it is it where to be private or something, or to indicate that it's a private variable?
Exactly. So if we want to tell other programmers, don't access name directly, I want you to use this getter instead when you need to read, right, or see what the name is. And then actually, how would I make, Chris, how would I make a setter for name as well if I wanted to change the student's name?
I mean, well, definitely it will be at property, def set underscore name.
Close.
Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, I should have told folks, the rules of the game are you can always phone a friend.
Yes, I would like to call on Lynn if he can help.
Awesome. Len, we've gotten the ball started here with the setter for name. There's one tweak we have to make, and how can we finish it off? Uh-oh, did we lose Len? Daniel, go for it.
Am I double muted? I'm double
Uh,
muted. I'm sorry.
You were muted.
So you have to use the set name dot or set name dot and then get name.
Close. The syntax here is, let's put it over here like this so I can have it be exactly the same. Getter name dot setter. So to create a getter, I can just use the property decorator.
Mhm.
The naming convention, and this is a little bit of Python magic for a setter, it is a little funkier, right? It has to actually be the name of the getter and then dot setter. And if
Right.
I don't have a getter with that property decorator, this won't work, right? I can have a getter without a setter. I can never have a setter without a getter.
Do we not have the getter? I'm sorry.
We do have the getter now. No, we're good. I was just explaining.
Got it.
Yeah. And then what do we want to do inside here?
Get name, make sure it's a string. So, well, if self, no, because don't you have to have an input there then? You'd have to have a string or yeah, new name, and then make sure that the new name is a string. So new name's a string.
Yep.
Then
We don't
you
have to,
would,
but I'm a fan.
and then at that point you would assign new name to self dot underscore name.
You got it. Right. So underscore name is the instance attribute that holds the value. So we're going to update it. We're just updating it through getters and setters. Nice. Awesome. Love it. Mikhail, yes, sir.
So is there a policy or to update the user if they input an incorrect type? So to tell them that they're wrong if they try to put like a integer in that set name?
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't shown a ton of it at this point in the course, more for the interests of time. But giving useful error messages is extremely important. We'll see a lot more of it as we get into Django later on. But you hit the nail on the head. And really what we should do is we do need an else statement here because I don't have a return. We should probably print invalid name. If we want to be specific, we could be like invalid type of, name, or actually we should just say name must be a string. Exactly like you were saying. Yes, this is a great idea. For the assessment, unless we're specifically requiring this, and we'll tell you if we are, it's icing on the cake. But yes, in the real world, absolutely. Awesome. Yeah, love it. Love it, folks. Let me go ahead and just build out the rest of this student. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to use getters and setters for the rest of it. We'll just do role equals role. School ID, that one actually might be a good one to make a getter and setter for. Why don't we? School ID and password are good ones to make getters and setters for. Again, if we were kind of thinking from a design perspective, right? There's probably some checking that needs to happen if these were to change. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. I'll just make a note to myself. Maybe we should make school ID, password, getters and setters, and come back to it later if we have time. What is good to do, by the way, is when you're looking at CSV data, it's a little hard to tell the type from here, but we can assume these are going to be integers. We might have to do a little casting, depending on how sort of the CSV conversion stuff works, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So this is awesome, right? We've built a student, they have a getter, they have a setter. I do want our student to have a dunder repr method, and would someone maybe who hasn't volunteered yet like to walk me through that? Daniel, go for it.
Yeah, so what you can do, so it's just literally gonna be a string. So you could just do return F for format, and the parentheses. You could do the curly brace brackets, and you could put in, I believe it's just self dot name.
Yes, though now that we've made the getter, we really should be following our own convention and using the getter, but otherwise you hit the nail on the head.
Okay, and then you can do the rest, for self dot age, and then self dot role, and that should be the string when you print out the student.
Yeah, and I'll add school ID because that's useful. You know, it doesn't really matter now, but it is good to think about. We probably don't want to print out the password here. Though if I was debugging, I might put it in there. Daniel, awesome, and thank you. And Daniel, actually, will you just take us home and let's actually here in the runner, just create a student. Let's just make someone up and print them out so we can confirm that our code works and that I don't have a typo or anything anywhere.
Yeah, so what we can do, we can make an instance of a class, so we can name it, let's do Francisco,
Love it.
and then you do student, and then you would enter the parameter. So for the name, it would be Francisco. Age, we could put 80. And
Love
then,
it. Okay,
yeah,
you're on a roll. Role, what should role be?
mm, well, I guess in this case, it should be, s-
Yeah, it should be student. That was a
yeah.
little bit of a trick question. And I apologize. Where I wanted to go with it is if we look in the CSV file, we can see what role is for student and staff. And we can see staff has different roles, but all the students are just students, exactly like you said.
Is there a way we can initialize in the def init? Can we make role equal student?
There is. How can we do that?
I believe you can just do that in the parentheses of the init. You just do equals student,
Yep.
and then can you take out the self role, self role equals role in the def init? Or yeah, it should be in
We
there.
can. Why do we want to?
Is it because to simply initialize the role for the class?
Oh, to always be student, you mean for every student?
Yeah.
Got it. So this actually accomplishes that. What this does, though now there is one change I need to make in order for this to work. And I'll talk through that change in just a moment. But what this does is it says, hey, if no argument is passed for role, set it to a default value of student. So if I don't pass anything in for role, right here, what does this get set to?
Student.
Student, right? Yeah, exactly. So that actually will work great and do exactly what you wanted to accomplish. And the change that we do have to make, because this is great, because now I don't have to type student all the time over here. And I'll give us a little more room just for the moment. Right, I don't have to type student. Instead, I can put in you know, a student ID of, let's just make it up, 123, and a password of, let's just make it up like password 123. What's the problem with my code the way it is right now?
I think it's the order. You need to put student the roles last, right?
Yeah.
Because it's gonna be initialized.
Exactly, because the way it is right now, Francisco will go to name, age goes to age, all is good. But hey, now 123 goes to roll, and that's not what I want. So when you make, this lets us make it a named argument, and also it gives it a default value. And I believe it also makes it optional in Python. And when you do this, it needs to be at the end, past the other arguments. Awesome. I've got a red squiggly here, Daniel. How do I fix that? In my
I
runner
believe you have to import the student class. So it'll
And how do I
be
do that?
from classes, which is the directory, dot student. Oh,
Oh,
right?
bad.
Is it? Yeah, because that's the file name, and then you import the class, which would be student.
love it. Yep. And let's print out Francisco, and fingers crossed, we should be rolling. Awesome, man. Great job, and thank you. Murad, yes, sir.
Just one step back. When you create the getter and setter, okay, we have to create getter and setter for everything because everything can be changed, right?
We do not have to create a getter and setter for everything. It is really more of a design choice of if it makes sense to protect and control how we modify this, like if there's an extra step where we want to do validation like this. But we don't have to. And right now for this particular program, really, I wouldn't have put a getter and setter on the name. I would have probably done it on school ID and password, but this is more about just showing a getter and setter. Yeah, good question.
So no, one more time. So do you mean the only attribute that will be changed, that the one that they need the getter and setter?
Yes, if I'm going to indicate to other programmers that like name should be private, that we don't want to access it directly, then I should make a getter and setter. But it's really up to me to decide whether I want to do this with name or not. And we can dig into that more later. I know I see a couple other questions as well, so I want to tackle those and then move on so we can build out more of the application.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you. Erica, yes.
It's similar. Well, it's in the setter too. I know that it's a design choice, like the if is string, otherwise error, but it couldn't it also just be self the underscore name equals string new name, and it turns it automatically into a string?
You mean to sort of cast new name into a string?
Yeah.
Great question.
Turn it into a string.
We could do that. There's actually a reason. So 2 points. First off, you are totally correct that if I wanted to, I can just do this. Right? Again, it's really more of a design question of when I want to add validation or error checking logic. It is a good practice, and this is a good example of when you might want to do it, but this totally works. We don't want to cast new name into a string most of the time. Sometimes we might, but often like something has gone wrong somewhere else in the program, and maybe like the ID is being passed in instead. So what we want our program to do is throw an error and complain and say something is wrong. I did not get what I was expecting to get, because we don't know why new name is not a string, right? Does that help answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, great question. And Chris, yes, sir.
Yes, piggybacking on what Mubba was asking, you were saying that we would have done getters and setters with school ID and password instead of name. Why would you? I guess for time purposes you chose name, but why? Yeah, why school ID and password? Are we making sure they are numbers, or like what was the logic there?
Yeah, great question. And again, the reality is with getters and setters, it depends on how a lot of the other parts of the program work, whether you need them or not. And on the assessment, we'll be telling you very explicitly, like make this a getter and setter. To answer your question though, and you raise a really good point. So to me, when I see school ID, I know that can't just be some random number, right? Because it's a number in the system. Maybe it needs to increment. Maybe there's some other sort of formula. But so, yes, name we absolutely should get correct. Age we should get right. Role we should get right. If I screw up ID though, we'll learn this as we get later into the course, but usually when you need to find something, you're looking it up by ID. So screwing up ID could be a real problem. And then with password, it's sort of similar, right? There's probably rules about what is or isn't a valid password. You know, you can't use the same password that you had before. So there's a lot going on with password. So it makes sense that we'd want to have some extra validation and checking around password. We might not want to print password all the time either, and having a getter lets us add some logic to control that, potentially. So stuff like that is what was on my mind.
Okay, yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Yeah, and we definitely will be getting into all that stuff later in the course as well. I love talking about that stuff. It's just balancing sort of teaching the technique and then these really good, like, sort of bigger design questions as well. But yeah, I love it. And I'm always down to talk about that stuff all day long. So this is awesome. We've got a student. It's printing out. Francisco is the world's oldest high school student, and he's doing great. And let's look at our checklist. Well, we're doing great here, right? We're kicking ass, if you excuse my language. So now we need to import all these students from that CSV file into our program. And also, hopefully you can see how if you kind of do this pseudo coding and planning and just break it all up into really small steps, it makes it easier to write the code. It makes it easier to test as you go. It makes it easier to think about those kinds of design decisions that we're talking about, because I'm just focusing on the one piece because I like have my big plan. So now let's tackle the CSV part, and this is a good part to be tackling. And I am actually going to make sure I have my reference code for how to use a CSV file correctly, because this is 100% not something I have memorized. So there's a lot of different places we could write the code to import from this CSV file for students. The place we are going to do it today is on the student class. But this is a great example of something that's not an instance method, right? It doesn't make sense to do it here, right? We're not going to do Francisco load all students, because I want to create an instance of the student class, a new student object for all those people in the CSV. We're going to want to do student load all students, right? And then we're probably going to want to put it somewhere else, to be honest. I'm probably going to want to do something like this. And then maybe what I want to do is school.students equals all students. You know, and this is, you know, this could be a method. We could have a getter and setter there. There's a lot of different design choices we can make, but especially just for a prototype, I think this is a good starting point. So this is really our goal. And before I write this code, someone remind me what kind of method on the student class are we probably going to want to create to accomplish this task? There's three options, right? We've got instance methods, and we know it's not that, and there's class methods and static methods.
Class method.
Yeah, probably a class method. Oh, and I see there's a question in the Zoom chat. Give me, or in the X-ray channels question. Give me just a minute. I think we'll build this out, and then we'll circle back to that one. Yeah, we probably want to use a class method. We can use a static method if we want, but a class method makes a bit more sense. And remind me again, like school.students, what is this call? Oh, I made a mistake, folks. I totally jumped the gun here. What mistake did I make here on line 37 for this code that we still have to make real? how am I using the school class wrong? And let's make it maybe a little easier. Let me rename this to Ridgemont High.
Is
So-
it Rich,
Sorry?
is it Richmond Heights students?
Exactly. And Eric, I saw your hand up as well, sir.
I was just gonna say the same thing. You're trying to access an instance attribute as if it were the class attribute.
Yeah, exactly. I got confused. I forgot that students is an instance on a particular school object. Right? It's not all students for all schools. It's all the students in Ridgemont High. An easy mistake to make, and also why it's good to constantly be writing code as you run it. Truth be told, if I was sort of writing code for real, I wouldn't have written this code at all, because my rule is I just never want to write code that I can't run to see if it works or not. You know what I mean? That's how you kind of get into trouble. So we'll comment that out. We know where we want to go, and we'll come back to it. Let's go ahead and write this code to load all our students. So we'll have our Thunder init method there. And actually, before I dive into this, let me catch up on the X-ray questions channel, because I did see there was at least a question or two there. And I think this is a good pause point. So I see someone asked, with repr standing in place for a print statement, would you usually match it with the init order just for readability? Raven, could you maybe clarify or add on to that question a little bit to help me understand how to tackle it?
Sure. With
Thank you.
Francisco printed out as the repr get name, age, role.
Mhm.
But with role at the end of your init as a fixed variable. Whatever is in the init is what you're going to be placing into the empty list, right? So it's not printing out what exactly the same as what, I don't know if it's just readability, but that's what we're printing out is what's in the repr, right?
Got it. Great question. So, I think there's a couple metaphors we could use. I think one good one is all this stuff, like a student object is a bucket. Like if I'm gonna draw this out. And we've got name, right? We've got age, we've got role. And I think what we'll do is we'll make a student, we might as well just kind of eat the whole meal here. And this will be, the student class. And we'll have an instance of the student class here. And that'll be Francisco. And we've got school ID, and we've got self password, right? And I can take this bucket and I can put it wherever I want, right? If I do, and let's make this in red, maybe. If in my code I write, Francisco equals student, and I'm just gonna, what did we say? Like 1, 2, 3. Password. Love that we have that default value for student role. It makes life so much easier. Right? This creates a new student object that has everything in this bucket here, along with all this other behavior with all those methods. Like, and this is maybe where the bucket metaphor breaks down. But it's like we've got all this data in the bucket and we can do different things with it. And I can put the bucket wherever I want. Like if I've got all students, I can put, Francisco in there, and it's got everything in the bucket. But what I can do with my different methods is, like, say with repr, is I can like control how I take stuff out of the bucket. So the way that I define this stuff here inside the init method, the order from line 11 to 12 to 13, or the order here, and I apologize about the screen management here, folks. The order here, this is the order that stuff goes into the bucket. But once it's in there, I can control what order I take it out in, and I can take it out in any order I want. The same way that if I wanted to, for some reason, you know, I could write a method named print. You know, we wouldn't want to do this because we have repr or string, but just as an example, self.age, self.role, and so on. And I can do it in any order I want. And repr is just used when stuff gets printed or needs to be turned into a string. So when I'm adding Francisco to a list, like here, that is not actually using the dunder repr method. And I do want to check in just to make sure that I'm tracking and kind of understood your question correctly.
Yes, I guess it is just readability, because then when you're placing it into a list, it's however it's set up in the init, not the repr. I know
Yeah.
it's just something we reference to when I guess when we were breaking down the classes, whatever the repr is usually what we want to store. So I was just wondering if, I guess that's a common practice to keep it in order.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So I think the key thing there is the repr is actually completely separate from how we store it. I think here the bucket metaphor is useful. What we're storing is the bucket and everything in it. And then the question is like, if I want to show someone what's in my bucket, what order do I take it out in? And that's what all these different methods do. And if I need to like take the stuff that's in the bucket and turn it into a string, repr is sort of like the default way to do it. Like this is the default way that I'm gonna print this stuff as a string and show it from the bucket, if that helps a bit.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah,
A question.
totally.
So do you mean wrapper that's to give me output in the application, and print that just for the console?
Essentially, yes. I do want to move on so we can continue building it out, but I'd be happy to circle back and talk more about what repr and understring are doing later. So let's build out load all students, and then I think it'll be a good time for a short break. So we've got to do some CSV here, right? And we decided we know that this is going to be a class method and not an instance method. So I know that I want to call this class method, and let's just call it load all students. I always want to start my methods with a verb. And because it's a class method, I don't say self, right? I say CLS for the student class. And does someone maybe want to take a crack at helping me through writing the code to read data from this students.csv file? Eric, yes, sir.
You'd want to do use with open, and I think we're calling it students.csv. I don't see it on the screen.
Yeah, let me open this over here. And let me actually pause and check in with you here. The file name is students.csv. Is that all I need right here in the with open?
So you would need to go down into the data directory
Mm-hmm.
and then grab it like that. I think that should work.
Yeah, we're almost
you want to.
There is one more thing we need to add here, and I apologize for jumping in. This is just something I want to make sure we hit on and cover. Think about, and as always, you can phone a friend. Think about, once I finish writing this load all students method, where is it executed? Where is it being run from?
This would run in the student.py.
Well, I'm writing it here and it's defined here, but where in my program am I actually going to call this method?
Oh, in the runner.py.
Yeah, we're going to call it right here. So I'm defining the method here. It's going to be called and executed here. So Python is running that code inside runner.py. So what does this file path have to be relative to?
Oh, so you would need to go into so it'd be relative to the runner.
Exactly.
So if you were at the runner level, you would have to go.
And we may not have seen this, but if on the command line I do cd dot slash, what does that mean?
Is
Like-
that the current level?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this a bit on day one, but dot slash means from the current level, from where I am now. So ls dot slash data says, look in the current directory for a file named data. So up
Okay.
here, if we do dot slash data, this is look in the current directory for a file named data. And because we know this is getting run from runner py, the path needs to be relative to that. And I do want to point this out because I think this is a common pain point on the assessment. You will need to use relative paths, and it's important to make sure that they're correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I would specify we want the read mode, so comma read. Or I'll just do R in parentheses, I think.
Oh, I actually don't.
Or in
remember this.
quotations, I mean.
Ah, beautiful. Read mode is great.
And then
Yep.
I think you could leave it at that for now. So get rid of that comma.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we need new line, the new line separator. Let's run it without it and see how we do.
Okay. Well, I was thinking like just printing it out first. So like put maybe as student file.
Yeah, I'm gonna call it CSV file. Just because I think this is a good naming convention to follow, but you're on the right path. So with open opens up a CSV file for us and it gives us a name to interact with it with. And then what do we want to do from here?
And I was just gonna say, just to see what that's given us, do like 4-row in CSV file, print row, and just kind of see what that does.
Yeah, you're on the right path. There's one or two extra steps we have to do. So I'm just gonna drive a little bit just to take this home to demo this because I know we showed a little bit of CSV, but not a lot. We may need to add the new line thing. You're on the right path, Eric, and to do that, we're also going to want to import something from the Python standard library called I believe it's just called CSV, the CSV class. Because what we're going to need to use from that is something called dict reader. And so what this line of code is doing is this is going to take the CSV file and turn it into a dictionary. And I'm just going to add new line equals this now because it's not going to hurt to specify what indicates the end of a line if it's an empty string or something else. This takes the CSV file, it sets it up for us to read it as a list of dictionaries so that we can now do for row in reader, where each row is now a dictionary. So this gives us each row in the file is now a dict. And now indeed we can print this out. And in fact, let's go ahead and do that. And I think that's a good stopping point, and we should actually run this code. And so this code is actually good. All students is going to be empty, but when I run student load all students, we should see something printed out. So let's give this a shot. And it looks like I have a typo, which is the best kind of problem to have. And in fact, the error message is giving me the answer here. The student object has no attribute load all student. Did I mean load all students with an S? And I even have the line number, line 36, and I can see that indeed I had a typo. I just had the method name wrong. So this is great. We've got a dictionary of our students. Now we need to add them into the list of all students, right? So actually, does someone want to maybe... Oh, we don't even have a list of all students yet. That would be a good thing to add as well, now that I think about it. Oh, I apologize, folks. I got a little confused with my guide code. We're going to take a slightly different path here. What I want to do, and I'll just add a description of this up here. I want to return a list of all students, each student excuse me. I want to return a list of student objects. And right, this method is reading from the student's CSV file to get all the students, and we're going to return a list of all the student objects. So there's one thing that I should add here, which is we're going to need an empty list to start with. And then we're going to need to add all the students into it. So I'm going to want to do something like this, where new student equals student. And I'm going to use what's called quargs in Python. And what this should do is take that dictionary and pass in each property on the dictionary as an argument. So this is going to take all of these attributes in the dictionary and pass it into each of the right argument by name for my student class and do that work for me. So I don't have to, type out by hand something like row.get name, row.get age, and so on. And then I want to append to my list of all students the new student. And fingers crossed, that should do the trick for us. And now I can, I think maybe outside the with statement, return all of my students. And let's run this and see if it works, and then we can talk about it, and then we can take a break. So let me add a print statement here. And hopefully we will see a list of all our students printed out now. And we're looking good. It's a little confusing to read just because of the way I wrote the dunder repr method. We probably need a nicer looking way to take all the items out of the box. But I can see that I've got Lisa, who's a student. I've got Jesse. I've got Slater. I've got Kim. I've got Dave. I've got Doug. I've got everyone. And in fact, I'll do a quick sanity check over here just to make sure that all of this looks correct and we're not missing anything. I do in fact. Oh, we don't see passwords because we didn't put that in the dunder wrapper method. But since everything else is here, I'm pretty sure password got in there correctly as well. So, you know, maybe we would, for development purposes, want to add password to dunder wrapper. All right, this is probably a perfect point to pause and check in and take some questions, and then let's take a break. Eric, yes, sir.
So the line 21, the keyword arguments on your student file. So line 21, when you do new student equals student star star row.
Yes.
So that worked because of the way the CSV file was, it just happened to be in the correct order for us, right? It didn't somehow pick out name and be like, oh yeah, assign name here, assign age
No,
here, right?
it actually
Just the,
does. It actually does do that. It's a little magical. Remember here, and in fact, let me go ahead and let's just re-add that print statement so we can see the dictionary. And let me run this again. So let's walk through this, because actually this is a good one. Line 18. This does a couple different things. With is how Python nicely handles opening a file, closing a file when we're done, dealing with any error messages. Open, we need to give it the relative path from runner.py, where this method is going to get run, to where our file is. R, as you pointed out, Eric, is to say, hey, we're only going to read to this file, so I don't accidentally write to it. New line is to say, hey, you can tell when you hit the end of a line in this CSV file because there's nothing, there's an empty space. And we might not even actually need this. Sometimes the new line might be there's a special end of line character. Sometimes for CSV files in other formats, it might be something else. Let's see real quick if this runs without it or if we get an error. And it would help if I had my closing parentheses. So it does work just fine without that. It's not going to hurt to add it there. And then we're saying, hey, when you open this file, assign it to this variable CSV file, and this is how I'm going to interact with it. DictReader is a built-in Python class, as you can see. And it does one thing very specifically. It turns each row of a CSV file into a dictionary and makes it so that we can loop over it. So if I didn't have line 19, reader equals csv.dictReader, I couldn't have line 20 where I iterate through each row, and this row would not be a dictionary, right? And in fact, if we want to, we could name this like student individual student dict. I don't know if that makes it better or worse, to be honest. Sort of the convention is you just name it row, but if I can, I'll try to name it something relevant if it's not too long. So that's like, this is a row, right? That's now a row. This is now a row. So that's how we get the dictionary. And then here, these two stars are what's called quargs in Python. And we did show this to you last week. We spent a little bit of time on it, not a ton. And we can actually just ask ChatGPT. I think it's always a good tool for this. But what it's actually doing is kind of like it says here, we actually can pass keyword arguments to a function. And the ChatGPT example here is maybe helping more than it's hurting. So let me actually close this off. But what is actually happening here is, like, if name did not match up with this argument name, we would have a problem. For instance, let's say I change school ID to student ID because I feel like it should be named different. And let's run this and see what happens. And we get an error. And the error is student init got an unexpected keyword argument, school ID. So remember in Python, you can have named arguments, and you do it this way by adding the equal sign and a default value to stuff. So what this star row does, and I apologize, folks, if I'm struggling a bit, I'm breaking this down, but it does indeed, and let's run this again so it's right, and I can use this as an example. It does indeed match name in the dictionary to this argument named name, and age to age, and school, and so on and so forth. And so they don't have to be in order, and Python will do the matching for us. Does that help answer your question a bit, Eric?
Yes, it does. I didn't know if we were gonna have to worry about like formatting the CSV further, at least the dictionaries it printed. But no, that is awesome that it works that way.
Yeah, great question. It is a little magical. I'm not gonna lie. It's super useful. It is kind of magical. Daniel, yes, sir.
So just to reiterate, we use a class method because we are grouping a bunch of dictionaries to a list, right? We want to use a static method.
We could use a static method. If we did, I'll show you exactly what the difference would be. You make a good point. Oh, in fact, I had this here. So this is what it would look like as a static method. As a class method, we can just write CLS right here. So a class method is a little easier, right? Because if I change the name of the student class for whatever reason, I don't have to change that line of code. And it does make sort of, just in terms of design, and when other people look at your code, it kind of makes sense to have this as a class method, but it could work as a static method, and there's not a huge difference.
Okay, it's just by design choice, right?
Basically, yeah.
Okay, and one more question. So on runner.py, it was when you changed Richmond High from school to Richmond
Mhm.
High. The reason why you did that is because we are you thinking about the grand scope of things? Like we could have multiple schools. Is that why you wanted to name it specifically?
Great question. We absolutely could create multiple schools, though we're not really designing our program. Before it was named school, and honestly, I just found this confusing, right? Because we have a class named school that starts with an uppercase S and a variable named school that starts with a lowercase s. And they're two separate things. This is a separate variable and an instance of the school object, but I was getting confused. Like I thought, oh, that's the class. And I forgot that this is a school object, it's an individual school. So I just named it the same name that we gave this particular school to make it easier to read the code.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Yeah, it turns out that like naming stuff well is challenging, but makes your life so much easier. Brandon, N, yes, sir.
Yeah, so with line 22 and the keyword args, I kind of view that as a two-way spread operator. We're like, so when we use the spread operator, we're spreading an array into something else.
Are we
But when
talking
we're
about the spread operator in JavaScript?
well, we can also use spread in Python, but the keyword args kind of does it from two different sources, where you're taking the keyword arguments of the class init method and the row arguments for the dictionary to create, or sorry, the row pieces in order to create the dictionary. But that's just how I see it functioning, if that helps anyone.
Yeah, I think that can be a good way to look at it. I do just want to say, I actually had to Google right now how to kind of use a spread in Python. It's not quite the same as JavaScript. they have different names and they do have some differences in behavior. But yes, we are essentially breaking up this dictionary, and then each key value pair, each name gets assigned to the correct argument. That gets passed in.
Right, but it does have to be predefined as far as the actual placement. So the arguments in the class have to be the same as the CSV file.
Yeah, exactly. They do. Totally. Yeah, and there's a little more going on here with how Python deals with arguments that get passed into a function. It actually creates a list, and to be honest, I think I would have to do a little digging to really be able to give like the correct explanation. But we've got the essence of it, that the key of the dictionary has to match the name that we give the function argument when we're using star quarks. And it is a little magical, but it does make life a lot easier. And I just want to check in to see too if there's any other questions, or if folks would like maybe another breakdown on the star quarks, because I think that is something we've seen a little less of, and it's doing an awful lot for us. Gary, yes, sir.
So it allows you to access the dictionary and to make changes to it without actually affecting the dictionary.
Good question. Close. It doesn't let us change the dictionary. It lets us, like, and actually maybe the easiest way to do this is we should just write out what we would be doing otherwise. And let me make sure I get this syntax correct. New student equals student row and name. And someone please tell me if I've had a brain freeze and I'm using the wrong syntax to access elements on a Python dictionary. Does this look familiar and correct to everyone? Because I know there's also get is the other way to do it. And row password, and I've got a typo to fix over here. So this and this end up doing the same thing, right? Because at the end of the day, we need to pass into that dunder init method. And let me open up student over here. And I'm just going to close all this stuff out so we get a little more room. At the end of the day, this is our dunder init method for the student class. And we need to pass in an argument for each one of these things and in order. So this is the straightforward way of doing it, where from this dictionary, I got to grab the name and pass it in as the first argument. Age is the second, role is the third. Actually, I apologize. Role comes at the end because we moved stuff around. So let me change this. And I know we have a default value and don't necessarily need it, but I'm going to put it there for the purposes of the example. Right? Because name, age, school ID, password need to be in order. We can totally do this. This code is perfectly fine. It actually has some advantages because it's explicit. So in some ways, even though it's a bit more typing, in some ways I actually like it better. But it is a lot to type out. And what this line does for us, and I should change this to CLS, excuse me. But they both do the same thing, right? CLS is just a placeholder for student. And so what this line does, these two stars, what's called quargs, is because this is a Python dictionary, it can do this work for us. Python knows the names of each of these arguments, even though there's an order that we have them in, it kind of stores them under the hood as a list or a dictionary or something. So it knows that the first argument is name, and the second argument or parameter is age, the third is school ID, and so on. So it will take this property from the dictionary name and pass it as the argument here. And same for age and school ID and so on. So it does this for us automatically, and we don't have to worry about order, and dictionary order doesn't really matter, right? Like, you know, yes, in the CSV file, order matters because I've got these headers here. The first thing is Lisa, you know, the second thing is age, the third thing is student. But once I turn it into a dictionary, dictionaries aren't really about order. I can the idea of a dictionary is to grab things from it by key. So it doesn't matter that when I print the dictionary, I see name first and age second. Python will look in the dictionary for a key name and grab that value and stick it into dunder init, and same for age and school ID and so on. And I'm repeating myself here, so let me just pause and check in. And Raven, yes, sir, I see you have a question.
Yes, so let's say the CSV order in the dictionary, and we have a test file that mirrors the CSV order. So in our .py file, if we're at roll at the end, so the test case would fail because we're not in that order that the dictionary is in, right? So let's say we return new student and roll is at the end, but what we're trying to pass for the test case, roll is at the third or number 2 index, we would essentially fail the test, right?
Not correct. I know that in one or two other places we've turned a dictionary into a list, but dictionaries don't really have indices, or if they are, that's not how we would be using them. If I was writing a test like that, it would look something like, I'm just making this up, but def test student has properties. And let's just say I pass in a student. And you know, student dot school ID is not none. Let's just put an if statement here, and we'll sort of maybe, this is not a very good test, but I just need something that we can see a sort of pattern in. And let's actually we'll do it like this, right? We'll return false if something is bad, and that makes a bit more sense. Let's do password. Let's do after password. Let's do age, right? I can have these in whatever order I want. It doesn't matter. And same if I was working with the dictionary either, because we're not going through a list. We're grabbing keys, and we can decide what order we pick things out of the bucket. Daniel, yes, sir. I see you had a question as well.
Yeah, so just to make sure I'm not getting confused, so this that class method we are making using the CSV file, we're making a new object called new student, right? Are these
Exactly.
instances? Okay. And I guess, is this a fancier way of initializing a bunch of students instead of going to the runner.py and entering them, like just hand jamming it?
Exactly.
Okay.
Plus, we have the student data in a file, so we have to get it from the file.
Okay.
But yes, we could stick this in runner PY if we wanted to. It's just a fancier way of doing it, and it makes my world a bit more organized because it's along with the rest of the student code, and I don't have to hard code the student class in here if this name changes or something like that. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Totally. Awesome. Great question, folks. We have been going for a while. Let's take a break. Let's take 15. And then when we come back, let's build staff, which is going to be very similar to student. And then we'll build our terminal program. And I think that sounds like a good plan. Let me pause the recording and then I'll kind of check in with everyone. All right. So in the first part of the review, we got pretty far. We created a school class, a very simple one. We created a student class, and we then imported all of the students from that CSV file into our program. And then we dug into the logic of this load all students class method and did a lot of good discussion and digging into star quarks. We're going to create a staff class that's going to be really similar to student. We're going to also import that CSV, and then we're going to build this command line program to add and remove users. Before we do that, let's update the school class a bit because we have some students now, right? So I think actually what I want to do is, and let me, I was playing with my code a little bit, so let's change these names back so that I don't get confused the way I did before with the names. Because our school is Ridgemont High. We have this student Alice that we no longer need. We have all the students. And we printed it out to confirm that it worked. But in fact, we can just do Ridgemont High.students. And let me pull up the school class here as a reminder that we just have an empty list here. Equals load all students. And now our school should have a list of all the students. And just to double check that, let's print that out. And down here, I'm seeing a list of all students. So we're cooking, we're doing great. So let's do the same thing for staff. And the good news here is I can really use the student code that we already wrote as our guide code. So in fact, I'm just gonna pull it up here on the left, and I'm just gonna pull staff up here on the right. And I might do some copying and pasting. I generally recommend avoiding it with guide code because what always happens is there's some minor change that needs to happen and you miss the minor change because you copied and pasted it. And when I say you, I mean me because I've done that 1,000 times. So I'm going to build this out, but I'm going to save this sort of load all staff thing for last. And I am going to copy and paste in the interest of time. But I'll also show you the safe way to copy and paste, which is do it in chunks so we can make the changes that we need. For instance, school ID is employee ID, and let's just double check in our data to make sure I don't have that name wrong. And indeed, it's employee ID. So let's go ahead and in fact, I think if I do F, it will search everywhere. And so let's change this to employee ID. There's undoubtedly a good keyboard shortcut for doing it. I'm sort of used to the Vim ones, and I don't know the VS Code one off the top of my head. And I see a squiggly here, which tells me I have some sort of error. I'm seeing something about indentation. So let me just run the formatting and see what we don't like. Because it's got to be something. It's got to be something simple if it's an indentation error.
It's the next def up. It's set in one space more, it looks like.
Say that one more time.
I think the first def in it is set in one space. In front of the def. So at the very beginning of the def init for the D, I think there's just one extra space. Okay. right before the start of depth.
Oh my God, you are so right. Thank you so much. I was not understanding for a minute. I'm not sure why my Python formatter is not working. We can set up this Python formatter black. There's also something called auto pep8. I should set those up. I'll try to demo that later today, because what we really want is to be able to run this format document command and for it to fix stuff like that for us. And it should, but I just need to get that set up.
Oh,
So that-
Control Shift L is to select all occurrences, by the way. Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Thank you. And we've got our staff class, and yeah, there's a global find and replace. I'm not sure of the find and replace per file. We've got staff, we've got create, we've got repper, just like I did with Alice making a student. Let's just make a staff member named Bob, just as a sanity check. And I don't even care if the role is right or not. I just want to confirm that I don't have a typo in my code. And we're seeing Bob's information printed there, which is great. And now we can pretty much copy that CSV code.
You are defining Bob as a student though, not staff. 35.
Oh my God. My apologies. Thank you. Let's go ahead and import staff and make that change. Yeah, great catch, and my apologies. And there we go. And that's a great example of the principle. If the test is wrong, you know, then that's the limitation of tests, if the test itself has an issue. Before I copy over this load all students method, let's talk about what are we going to have to change in it for staff. There's one or two things, but one thing in particular that is the big thing that we have to change. And the big thing is the file path right here, because we're not reading from the students file, we're reading from staff. Luckily, they're both in the data directory, so it's going to be very, very similar. So let me go ahead and copy and paste that over now. And get rid of that repper method because I don't need it. And I should add class method. And for some reason, and my apologies, let me just make sure I copy the right thing here. There we go. And we'll just get it all in order and looking right. And let's rename this to load all staff. So there's a couple things that need to be renamed, right? Just so that when I read this code, it's easy to read. If we wanted to refactor this later into one function that did this, that could be something that we do. I don't have to change this because since it's a class method, it's going to use the staff class, and we have that class placeholder for staff right there, which is awesome. And then I just need to change students to staff. And I'm just, as a sanity check, going to search through this file for a student to make sure that it's not there, and I'm not seeing it. So that looks great. Let me go to runner py, and let's do the same thing here that we did a moment ago. And in fact, I'll just copy this code as well. And let's do ridgemont.hide.staff equals staff, load all staff, and let's print ridgemont high.staff. And let's see how we do. And let me comment out the students and the stuff that we don't really care about anymore in our print statements. And this looks good. I'm seeing staff members. I think they're right. I'll do a quick sanity check. I do see this XX all over the place. So let's see and make sure. And indeed, that is everyone's password. Culpepper is 25 and they're a principal and their ID looks right. So I think we did a good job here and we've now got the staff. So this is awesome. We've gotten through an awful lot of this. We've got the staff class. We're importing all the staff. And now we got to write our command line program. And our command line program has to do what? Let's refer quickly to the README, which unfortunately I think I deleted. So I have it kind of as a reference here. Let me pull it up and I'll just copy and paste kind of what we need our README to do so that we have our game plan for the next step here. So here's our student interface. I'll add it as a stretch goal. List all staff. We might as well, right? We added them. But I think starting with all of these is a good point so we can get to adding a student and removing a student. And so each of these now becomes its own task. Like task, show main UI. And then our tasks will be just all these different features. So I can just run through my list. And just like we've been before, just tick boxes as we go. And for user interface, a while loop is a great thing to have because we also, you know, once someone lists a student or something like that and we're done, we want them to be able to come back to the main menu. So let's actually add that as a specific feature. Like we want all of these features, but then the next feature should be if the user selects an option, once they're done, unless they've quit, show the main menu again. And I'm going to work backwards a little bit because in order to do this last feature, we need some sort of loop, right? And it's probably a while loop and there's probably a Boolean. So let me go ahead and I like having my list that I work off of with me. So I think I'll pull this up here. And then down here, we can start writing out the command line program code. And I know that I'm going to want to be able to like start and stop this program, right? If I just do while true and you know, print whatever, then it's just going to go on forever. So I need some sort of Boolean here. So let's name it just is active. This is not the best name. I would like a better name. Or how about just for fun, let's say like is, yeah, let's just stick with is active. I get a little obsessive with the names. And so now I can print these options, it will loop forever, and we're good to go. Let's add an input, and it should look something, let's make a variable named maybe command. And it'll receive the user input. And I think and hope I'm going to use a doc string right here. If I get it totally wrong, then we'll see. But I hope this lets us put all of this stuff right in the command prompt. So I'm just going to copy and paste this whole thing and hard code it just to get started, just to make sure I have this right, and I'll make it actually like work and be nice and pretty as we go. So this is a good start. I think what I'll do is over here, I'll put this over here. You know, welcome Richard, your access level is principal. A future feature maybe is customizing this for different users, but that's way out of scope. We also want list all staff as option 5, so let's put that there. I do want to use the name of the school here. And while it would be cool to make this program work for multiple schools, that is also a bit out of scope and something we can do later. So instead, what we will do is we will just do, and now this needs to become F string, which I'm actually not sure it lets me do with a doc string like this, but let's see. And let's see if this works. And I should probably get rid of that empty space right there. And let's run our code and see what happens. And because I'm in an infinite loop, you know, on the command line, I need to hit Control C to exit it. So that's how I quit right there. And you know, this is looking good. I'm seeing the correct name, Ridgemont High. That makes me happy. And we see all our options. So let's get the quit option to work, because that is probably the easiest option to test, right? I can very easily test if someone quits. And I'm just gonna use a bunch of if statements.
It should
There
be
are,
6 too.
I'm sorry, Len?
You have you added a 5 and you should update quit to 6.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. Great call. You know, eventually we probably want to put this into a function or something, because that's what we're gonna have to do, so that once I list all the students, I can do something again, but we can cross that bridge when we get there. For now, let's just and let me make this a little more sane. Let me make this indent, see if I can't make this indentation a little more sane looking. Because it does drive me a little nuts. Because I kind of live off of looking at indentation. We're just gonna have to live with it. So just bear in mind all this stuff. And I think what I'll just do, so I don't get confused, is I'll add a pound here and I'll say like handle user input. And that way I can keep track of what should be indented where. So if command equals 6, and I'll add as a to-do for us to do later, handle invalid user input, but we're not going to worry about it now. And I might have to cast 6 to a string, or cast it from a string to a number. I'm pretty sure, in fact, we will.
Yeah.
But let's cross that bridge when we get there.
Adam?
Yes.
Could you use the switch case or the match case, and then at the very end you could use the open character to catch all your errors?
I could, but I don't want to.
Got it.
Yeah, you totally can use a match case or a switch case here. It works pretty well. I have a little bit of a preference for if else statements if I'm going to be putting more stuff in them. Also, just in the interest of building this out, if else is simple, it's fast. But this is a decent use case for a match case as well, if you wanted to. And let's see, and indeed, let's see if this red squiggly unexpected indentation. Yeah, something with my indentation has gotten messed up because of all of this. So let's do this. Main UI message equals all that stuff. And now that can live there. And now we can just say input main UI message. And now I can get my indentation correct for things. And so hopefully what happens now is I can actually quit the program, though I may have to cast the string to an integer. Let's see. So I do have to do a casting because I hit 6 and nothing happened. And in fact, let's just put a print statement here. And just say like user input is and just so just to see it. It's always nice to be able to see it. And can someone actually remind me, how do I cast
It's because the input turns into a string.
yeah, it already tells me to a string. Yeah, this is gonna be the easiest way to do it, I think, is just have it be a string.
You could also just wrap the input in a int open.
Yeah, I
I'm
know.
saying it both ways.
Yeah, but there's no reason like we turn it into a string and then turn it back into an int. It's already a string, so we might as well just. I don't have any particular need for it to be an int.
That's fair.
Yeah. So this is great. Now we've got the program and it quits. And this is probably a good point just to check in and see. Let me look in the questions channel. Cool. Nothing in the questions channel. Any questions that we should look at real quick before we build out more of these features? Okay, cool. We'll keep rolling. And I'll keep checking in as well. I think you can all sort of see where we're gonna start going with this, because this is a pattern that we can build up very nicely. And in fact, I'm just gonna copy and paste this a whole bunch of times. And let's do it this way. Let's check first if someone wants to quit. And let's make this an else if, and we'll put all the other ones here. And so this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, this is 5. And let's just put pass in all of these places. And then after all of this, let's put an else. And we will say invalid user input. We could make it a nicer message, but just for demonstration purposes. Or let's say, please select an option 1 through 6. Right? We can make it nicer, but that's a good start. And now I can run this and I can at least test it because I have this little print statement here, just to make sure I didn't do anything silly. And if I hit 1 or 2, something is actually not right, because I would have expected to see this user input being printed right after each of my inputs. Oh, and in fact it is. And in fact, we're looping through. I apologize, folks. We're actually doing great. So if I scroll up here, I can see, hey, I input 1, we loop again, input 2, we loop again, input 3, and so on. So we're actually doing really good. So this is, I call it making the skeleton. I think it's really useful to make the skeleton as early as you can with all your code. The skeleton should always be real code that runs, but you don't have to put the logic in there or just hard code something dummy in so you can run it and test it. So now if I run down my task list, we've got this one done. And in fact, we've got quit done. So let's list all our students. And we already wrote the code to do that. That's what's going to be great. This is going to be really straightforward. And in fact, I'm going to add some comments here. Not list all comments, but list all students to help me keep track of what I'm doing. And so that as I'm writing code, I don't have to constantly refer to this other file. View individual student by ID. How about add a student? And then we have remove a student. And then we have, let me make sure I have this right. 1 is list all students. 2 is individual student by ID. 3 is add a student. 4 is remove a student. And there we go. 5 is now, I did modify the spec a bit. You all should not do this on the assessment, but I think it will be good to list all staff. 6 we have up top. And then we have like error case handle invalid input. And actually, we should test out the error case because I did not test that out. I, manually ran the code for options 1 through 5, but let's put in something like, and there we go, invalid user input. So easy, right? But if I had put it like 2 3s here or something like that, it's really nice to catch those issues right off the bat. So now we want to list all our students. Well, this is great. I can just do print Ridgemont High students. And you can see how if we wanted to handle multiple schools, we could wrap basically all of this in a function that would take the school as an argument, and that's all we would need, but that's a little out of scope of this. Let's go ahead and test this. In fact, now that I've written it, we might as well test it. And I see all my students. Awesome. I'm going to quit. Let's just go on to the next one. Let's list an individual student by ID. So this one gets a little more complicated, right? Because I need to get more user input. So let's just do student ID equals input, enter student ID, or actually, yeah, I think that's correct. I'm not sure from reading this if the intention here is like, should the input be, 2 space student ID or something else? We could do both. Do people have a preference? Let's do it the other way because I think this is how most of these command line things work anyway. So enter student ID you would like information for. And I'm gonna do this right here for add a student. And we're going to have to do something different for add a student actually, so we'll come back to it. But remove a student is similar. And I'm making sure that these messages are different for the user and also for me as the programmer as I'm testing this stuff. So now we have the student ID, and now I have a list of all the students. So I think I can just do something like student equals Ridgemont High dot students dot actually I need to do a quick lookup. I apologize, or if anyone remembers get how to grab something from a list, get object from list by key. And I just need a quick little reminder on the best way to write this code.
Isn't it just the name of the object.id, like object.id?
Well, it's in a list.
Is it, are you looking for index?
No, because we did not do anything with the student ID to have it matched by index, so that would be interesting. I think what we're gonna do, and in fact, I'll just use ChatGPT to help me. Is let me just bust out the trusty browser here, and let's check in with ChatGPT real quick, because there is a way to do this, and it's probably some of the really nifty stuff that Python has with lists and the list class.
Adam,
Yes.
I was doing this morning. It's for object in the, well, is it a class? This is what I don't remember. It's for like, I did it for object in my class and then print object dot, and then the whatever you want, what the item was that you're looking for.
That sounds close.
I was doing it on my car manager. So I did for object in car manager dot all cars print object.make.
Print object.make. Yeah, here's like the ugly way to do it. I think your way sounds about right. Let's give that a shot. So let's actually
It's in the chat.
oh, thank you. Maybe. I think an easier way to do this, and my apologies about this.
That's fine.
folks. Yeah. Is let's
You could find the index of the item with dot index and then print the Ridgemont High students of index.
I could. I think I want to try something like this. Let's see if this works. Which we could do as a for loop, to do it a little bit more, but because what I want to do is I think we need to iterate through the students, and we need to find the student where the ID matches. And let's just call this ID, because I think student ID is a little too long. And let's call this desired student, so it's a little clear. And let's print the desired student, and we'll see if this works. And if it does, then we can talk through it. And if it doesn't, we'll take the simpler approach. And I should also now look at my students and find a real ID, because it actually does matter now to test this out. And school ID 13345 is Lisa, so let's try that. And this is the danger of borrowing code from the internet, right? The name of the key is not ID, it is school ID. And in fact, let's change this so I don't get crazy confused. And let's run this one more time and see what happens. Student object is not subscriptable. Yeah, let's just do this the easy way. For student in, there's definitely a clever way to do it in one line, and I apologize, folks, that I don't know it. This is the simple way, and it works just as well, to be totally honest. If students get school ID equals, and let's call this desired, because I like all the names to be consistent. Desired school ID, desired student equals student. And let's put a little if statement here that says, let's put it here. Let's say if desired student is none, print student does not exist. And let's add a little more information, and let's say student with school ID, and here let's put desired school ID. Does not exist or not found, right? Else, let's print the desired student, and this will also help me debug. And let's see how we do now. And we want 1, 3, 3, 4, 5. And This looks close. I'm actually a little bit surprised. Oh, and of course, I apologize, folks. I just got confused. I was thinking about dictionaries, but this is the student class. So it's not a dictionary, it's a class attribute. So we do it that way. So fingers crossed, we should be good to go now. There's not an immediately intuitive way, I think, to read this here and understand that's the problem. For me, it was just, this confused me. I was like, why not? That's how you get a property on a dictionary. And I was like, oh, the student's not a dictionary. And there we go. Now we're cooking. We got Lisa. We might as well try it out for someone else just for fun. Let's do Kim, who is 34456. And now we got Kim and we got our feature working. And thank you all for your patience and for your help. Let's see, we're doing pretty good on time. We've got about 20 something minutes. I don't know if we'll be able to get to tests, but we'll definitely be able to get to everything else. I did take a couple twists and turns, so this is probably a good time to pause and check in and see if folks have any questions. I'm not seeing anything in X-ray questions, so I just want to check in to see if there's stuff that folks have a question about, or maybe we should briefly kind of go over in this part of the code. Okay, cool. Let's move on. And just to reiterate, there is 100% more Python-y way to do this in one line. I'm not sure what it is. It does point off a bit of the trade-off of having all the students in a list as opposed to a dictionary, where it's maybe easier to look them up. Folks were mentioning like the index of the list, and the issue is that the school ID is whatever it is, and not related to like whether that student is at index 0 or index 1 in the list or anything like that. Though it's a good thought. In general, you don't want to use list indexes as IDs because it's too easy to break and get out of sync, so to speak. Lists have the advantage of being flexible, so it probably does make sense to have the students in a list. So this code definitely can be a bit cleaner. But again, hey, it works. There's the saying, first make it work, then make it right, then make it fast. And I made the mistake of trying to make it right or elegant or better to begin with. I should have just written this code from the get-go. And then from there, this is some nice error handling to have, not only for the user, but for me. Because if I did something wrong here, this would tell me, right? Because I would get this message printed out. So we've got view students, we've got add a student, and we've got remove a student. So add a student is going to take a little more work, right? Because we're going to have to enter in all the student info. So I'm going to come back to that one. Let's handle remove a student because it should be more straightforward. And just moving down this list, we now list all students. We now view individual student by ID. And now we're going to tackle remove a student. Oh, and we have this feature working too with our loop, and we built that in from the get-go, which is also a good example of building the skeleton first, right? Because I kind of read through the whole spec. I saw that this is sort of like a more core feature or behavior of the program I needed to write, and I just built it right off the bat. So let's handle removing a student, and let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we say removing and adding. So, we're not going to actually add stuff to the CSV files today. You absolutely could. It's a bit more work, and it's a little out of scope. So for our purposes, adding and removing simply means removing them from this list. And I think I actually do want to find the Python command to remove something from a list, because there is a clever way to do it, probably with this sort of tool called filter. And I just need a bit of a reminder on how to use it. And it will probably get us what we want. And I probably could have and should have, in fact, used filter for the other one. Because I think what I want is something like this with a lambda. In fact. Because what I want to do is filter through the list of students and only return the students that that don't match the ID. So let's see if we can do this as a lambda. I'll steal this as guide code, and if it works, great, and if not, we'll switch gears. And I'll put that here just to look at. I am just gonna make this ID because there is this code is gonna get a little more dense. And I think this should look something like, let's call this updated students equals filter. And there's two things that we put here into the filter. The first is this lambda function that's gonna do whatever I want it to do on each item in the list. And then the second is the list itself, which is ridgemont.high.students. And sometimes you'll see, this is more of a JavaScript thing, but you'll see arguments written this way. And I'm gonna write it this way because it helps me see it a bit more clearly. So let's do lambda student. Student school ID does not equal ID to delete. So we'll give it a bit of a name. Student ID does not equal ID to delete. And I think that should do it for us, in fact, if fingers crossed. And what this should do, and if we put this on one line, it ends up looking like this, and it's a bit long. But what I'm hoping this will do is go through the list of all the students, this list right here. For each item in the list, it passes it into this lambda function, which is just a function that we haven't given a name to because it's this little one-off. And this is the argument student. And if I might need to flip this because I want all the students that don't match the ID. I have a suspicion I have this backwards, but let's start by just seeing if this works at all. And let's just print this list of updated students and see what happens. So I got to quit my program, right? Because I've changed the code. Let's run it again. Let's do remove a student. And let's use the same student we've been using. Lisa, it's easy to always use the same test data. So fingers crossed, let's see what happens. So this is a good start. Something gets returned. I'm not quite sure it's what I want, to be honest. So I'm just gonna table this. I kind of was hoping this would work for us, and I apologize for the detour. We'll come back to it another day. We're just gonna copy this same pattern here. And what we're going to do is we're going to do updated students equals bracket, and we're gonna say for student in Ridgemont High.students. And the lesson here, by the way, is like use the same pattern for stuff. You know, I wanted to make it fancy. I need to come back later and then we can make it fancy for all of them. But I already have a pattern that works for me.
Adam, if you haven't already overwritten that delete, could you probably paste that and comment it out for us to have in the notes for later, just to look at it?
Oh, the lambda?
Yeah.
To be honest, I'll just share the link later.
That's in the video. I got it. No problem.
Yeah, my code was wrong, so you probably don't want to use it as a reference.
If you were to cast that as a list, though, would that correct your issue?
That's the thing. I think I know how to fix it. And I just wanted to try it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Out here. Yeah.
No, I got it. You're recording. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, let's keep on rolling. I apologize, but I like where you guys are coming from. And it would be great to see that, and I think that's a good thing to review. Though, while it wasn't intentional here, there is a good lesson. There's always more than one way to skin a cat, and you know, if the code works and it passes tests, then it works and passes tests, and that's job one. So we're checking all our students, and we're gonna check if their ID is the same as the ID that we want to delete. And in fact, what we want is if it doesn't match, right, then we're adding them to the updated list of students. We want everyone except the person we're getting rid of in the new list. And now let's print this new list. Let's just run this and see if it works. And then we can, update Ridgemont High. And let's remove a student, and it's gonna be 1, 3, 3, 4, 5. And I'm seeing people in here. This is a good sign, right? I really should have started with the simpler one because it was so much easier to implement and gotten fancy later. And I'm seeing everyone except Lisa. So I'm feeling pretty good about this, and I think we're good to go. And then our final step here is we need to update the school. And we're just gonna say ridgemont.high.students equals updated students. I'm just gonna replace the list wholesale is what I'm gonna do. There is undoubtedly a better way to do this in Python, and I apologize that I don't have sort of the more elegant and Pythonic solution. But the silver lining here is you can get awfully far with the basic tools of the language, and you all can see that in action here. And this code is very readable and clean and easy to modify. So let's go ahead and add a student. And then I think we're basically done because listing all the staff is trivial and is going to be easy. So to add a student, like with this, we're going to need to prompt for information. We're going to need to prompt for a lot of information. So I'm going to be a little lazy. And what I'm going to do is say info equals input, enter new student info in the following format separated by commas. And the format is going to be name, and then what do we want? Age, and let's actually pull up the student class here as a reference. Let's make this as simple as possible. Name, age, we don't need role because all the students have the same role of student. Though that would change later. School ID, and then password. So this is a bit of a cheat, but it's quick and it's easy. And now I just need to borrow the internet to remind me how in Python Python break string into list by comma separator, and it's one command, and I just cannot remember it. Because if I'm not using something all the time, I forget it. And lo and behold, it's the simplest thing ever, and it's split. And that's what we're gonna do. Because and we can leave this name as this, and I think that's fine. Because I'm not going to worry about single quotes. I'm not going to worry about double quotes. The nice thing about commas is nobody has a comma as a part of their name, as far as I know. I see a hand up. Give me one moment to get this bit done and tested, and then we'll pause and check in for questions. So let's go ahead and just do info equals info dot split on comma. And let's print the info to test it out. There's got to be a way to turn this into a dictionary as well, but we'll cross that bridge. We'll cross that bridge later. I think I need to learn my lesson and just keep it simple. So let's go ahead and run this, and let's add a student. And now let's go ahead and add the stuff. Though it's driving me a little nuts that I don't have a space here in my prompt. And I don't have this anywhere either as well. So let's actually add that in our code everywhere that we're prompting for stuff. I did notice that earlier. And also, if I'm typing this out, it makes it a little harder to effectively kind of tell which is what part of my code. So let's run it again. And now let's try adding a student. And now this is much easier for me to read. And we're just gonna add Alice, and Alice is going to be 20, and Alice's school ID is going to be 123, and her password is going to be password. And let's hit enter. And this is great because I indeed got that information in the list. I am now going to be really lazy, and the simplest possible way, create this new student with info sub 0 is name, info sub 1 is age, info sub 2 is school ID, and info sub 3 is password. And because we had the excellent idea to make role a default value, I don't have to worry about it. And now let's print out our new student and see how we do. And let's print out the password because that's not in the repr method, though it probably should be, because you can see how useful it is for debugging. And let's make sure that all this works. So Alice is 20 and the ID is 123 and the password is password. And indeed, I have some sort of error. And I'm missing a positional argument.
In line 13, you have it's just commas, but you keep putting a space when you're putting in the information. So after every comma, you put a space there. So if you, yeah, so when the information gets put in, it has a space. with it.
That is an excellent point. I definitely need to fix that. But I don't think that's what's causing this error. But that does need to be fixed. I could be wrong, but I think this is me screwing something up with the arguments. But we should be able to sort it out pretty quickly. Because we've got name, age, role, school ID, password.
I think you just need to set the role for the default in student.
Yeah, I
and
think.
the init.
Yeah, I think when we were doing Q&A, I must have moved it around at some point to demonstrate something. Let's see if that solves the problem. Though you are absolutely right, and I do need to fix the space issue as well. And I'm in fact going to be lazy and not fix it right now, just in the interest of time. But that's a very good catch. 123 password. Okay, awesome. And now we're cooking. And I'm pretty sure, if we did do this and we add Alice, if I do this, it'll work. It's just not going to be pretty. And indeed, we see the spaces in here. And so we should get rid of those spaces. It does get a little tricky because what if someone enters a full name? But I think name is always first name. So I'm just going to add a to do for that, to be honest. And it's something that we would come back to later. Strip white space from each element in list so it doesn't get stored that way. Right. And we've got a new student. And now we just do Ridgemont High students and new student. And we're good to go. And I think the last command, list all staff, as you all can guess at this point, this is so straightforward because we just do Ridgemont.high.staff. And I think we've pretty much hit everything. And I think it was Eric. I know you had your hand up earlier.
I didn't realize it was up, so I put it down when you mentioned it.
Oh, no worries. Well, this is a perfect time to check in for questions because I think we just built our program. I can list all the staff. We've added a student to the students list and we tested that out and we've seen that it works. Past doesn't belong there anymore, so I should get rid of that. But we've tested everything. I kind of have my list and creating a user class. We have just enough time to do this. I think this would be awesome. Anyone have any questions to review before we just dive into making a user class? And let me check X-ray questions. Earl John, yes, sir.
Would it like let's say if you add a new student or delete a student, would it save to the local storage so that if you call the students again, it will like delete them or it will add them?
Good question. So, everything, putting aside the CSV files, because those are files in the file system, everything that we're doing here in this Python program, you know, from school students and staff, Ridgemont High students, Ridgemont High staff, all of this exists in the memory of the running Python program. And as soon as my program is done running, the computer gets rid of that memory, basically, and it's all gone. So we're going to learn as we get later into the course how to use databases or things like the browser's local storage that you mentioned to save this stuff. But that's a bit out of scope right now. And you're absolutely correct that really to actually add a student or remove a student, we probably should be getting rid of them from the CSV file or somewhere, because our data is not stored anywhere where it's going to last, where it's going to persist, right? And actually we'll kind of see how to use a database to do some of that next week. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Totally. Yeah, great question. Okay, awesome. We have just enough time, so I think making a user class is going to be awesome. If we take a look at student and staff, and let me go ahead and just collapse these load methods because we don't care about them. We can see right off the bat that so much is in common: name, age, role, password, even ID, to be honest. Though, you know, changing the ID might be a little tricky, and so we might want to skip it. But let me go ahead and just create a file in classes, and we'll name it user.py. And over here, I'll open up staff so I can have both of them as a reference, and I'll close these out. And over here, let's just have user.py. And as you all can see, it's really beneficial to follow your own patterns that you create and write your code in a consistent style. You know, and in a lot of ways, you know, as soon as I had that simpler solution, I should have just ran with it, because it's way better to write the code in all the same style, because I can use my own code as a reference, and then I can go back and change stuff later. So we're going to make a user class. We know we're going to need it under a init method. We know it's going to take self. We know we're going to have name. We know we're going to have age. We know we're going to have password. We know we're going to have role, which we cannot provide a default value for, because this is going to be used both for students and staff. I would love to add ID. Just the fact that it has different names in the two classes makes it a little more work, and we probably would have to rename each of these to be the same. Though actually we could use a getter and a setter, and that actually could be a good example of it. So let's just go ahead and do that. So let's add an ID, and then we'll have an ID should probably be before password according to the order I see it elsewhere, just to keep everything consistent, and role. And we're just going to keep it simple. Self name is going to be name. Age, and I apologize that I'm zooming a bit. I'm going to try and kind of zoom through, I think, what are the more straightforward bits, and then move at a better pace for the rest of it. Password is password, and role is role. And I am going to steal this repr method, and we're going to put it right there. And instead of school ID, we do want ID. And let's see, name, age, ID, password, and role. Name, age, role, ID, password. I think that's everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's really everything we need for our user class. I am gonna test it because as you all know, I do love testing everything, because what if I made a typo or a mistake? So let's just make a user named Alice, who's 20, and they're a teacher, and their ID is 123, and their password is password. And let's print Alice. And I've been running the runner.py, but kind of for like development and debugging, I am just going to run this user py file directly, because this isn't going to stay here. But now, hey, I confirmed that Alice worked, which is great. And so now what we want to do is let's use this user class for our students. So first off, we need to import it. And we should just be able to do from user import user. I think if we throw the dot here for a relative import, that'll be good, because these are both in the same directory. I may have to tweak this. We'll see when we run it. Let's use the user class here. And what we're gonna do is super init. And then we need to pass in name, age, role, school ID. And let's see, name, age. Name, age, ID, password, role. Name, age, ID, password, role. Name, age, ID, password, role. And we can get rid of all this stuff now. And I'll leave it here, but comment it out. What we are going to do, because this has an ID property, but it sure doesn't have a school ID property, is use a getter and a setter. And I'm going to make a getter. And I'm just going to name it school ID, because that's what we're using everywhere else in our code. And I don't want to have to change all that stuff. And I'm going to make a setter. I don't know if we change the school ID anywhere, but we might as well, just for consistency, so that it's done. And let's give it the same name. And this is often how you'll see getters and setters used, is similar to a property name. Though again, for learning purposes, we have that different naming convention. And here I'm just going to do, and I do need to pass in the new ID. And we'll just do self ID equals new ID. And I think that will actually take care of it for us. Let's see if this works. That's probably all we have time for. And if this works, it's almost the exact same thing to use it for staff. So let's go ahead and in runner py, we have all this command line stuff, but we also make some students. So let's go back to printing out Alice and information about Alice. I do think I might have gotten something wrong with the imports. Oh, and I do see a question. Let's run this and see how we do. So we actually did really well here. Alice got printed out, and we're using the student class, which now inherits from user. Right? If I look at student inherits from user. So right here where I've got Alice, and it's this stuff right here. Alice is cooking. But you know, we should make sure the ID stuff works, because we did make the getter and setter for that. So let's view an individual student by ID. And let's look at our list of IDs. And let's do Kim, whose ID is 34456. So let's try 34456. And that works. So we did it, folks. We wrote a user class, and we used it in the student class, so the user class is now the parent of the student class. And I think it's getting used here in load all students. We should do a bit of a confirmation. I'm pretty sure that's what happens here with class and how this functions. The easiest way to double check this is right here in this print statement. Let's think of something that only will be there now because of the user class. And it's going to be this ID property. Because what we did here with the student is we called super, we passed all this in. So the student has all these things, including ID, but the student also has this getter and setter for school ID. So if Alice has .id, then we know that indeed the user class was being used when all the data from the CSV file was being loaded and stuff. So right here, let's put a really big print statement that's hard to ignore. Alice ID to check if user class was used. And we should see Alice.id, and we should see something, right? We should see her ID. And something went wrong because I see student printed instead of ID. So I wonder if I got the role wrong or something wrong here. And we can debug that, I think, for a little bit, but we are running a bit long because it is 5 after, and this is a bit of a stretch goal. So this is probably a good stopping point for us. So we had self, name, age, school ID. And in fact, I wonder if this is the issue with maybe like the star quargs or something like that. I might have to dig in a little bit to see what the issue is there. But the fact that it didn't throw an error and break is a step forward, at least, because it tells us that exists. And what we could also do is we could just add a little message like, add a little method, am I a user? Print like this method only exists on the user class. And over here, in fact, let's just run it and do print Alice, am I a user? And if this works and we see this message printed, we know that the inheritance is functioning but has a problem. If it doesn't happen at all, we know that there's a bigger problem and it actually isn't happening. And we do see it printed here, so that's great, right? So that's a good sign that at least like part of this is working. So let me stop here and check in and see what questions people have. And Brandon, yes, sir, I know you had something on your mind.
I had a question, I had one comment. So the comment is it printing student because you're initializing Alice with student as the ID for the argument?
Say that again.
Is it printing the string student because when you initialize Alice as a student class, you have the third argument, which should be ID. You put student in.
Oh, right here, you mean? Oh, you are probably right. That is a great catch. And that code was from quite a while ago. That's a great call. Let's give this a shot.
Yeah, we rearranged it a little.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. And the fact, I don't remember if we tested looking up a student by ID. That would be an indicator too. But yeah, let's get this right. Alice, so name, age, school ID, 1, 2, 3, password, and then the role we will leave empty so that we use the default value of student. Let's give this a shot. Love it. Look at that. And now we have the ID right there. Brandon, thank you so much, man.
And then my question as well, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead, man. Yeah.
It was just a quick question whether or not when you had to make the getter and setter, and because to keep the code consistent for ID versus student ID,
Mhm.
for user, could you just make that school ID instead of using just ID so that you didn't have to do all of that?
I could, but I also want to use user with staff.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's why I did that. And in fact, we can see that in action here right now, where we want to inherit user. And again, all of this should be almost the same. And we can do super dot dunder init and pass a name, age. And this, the fact that role is third here, but last with student is gonna drive me nuts and should be fixed, but it means touching other things as well, so it is not going to be fixed right now. So this is just gonna be wonky. We need name, age. As you can see, like consistency is ends up being your best friend. Name, age, ID, password, and ID needs to be employee ID, and then we can have role. And this is why programmers get obsessed with names, because this stuff is so complicated. So the more you use good names so that it's easier to read your own code, then the easier your life becomes. And that should work, and we should be able to follow the same pattern here and make a getter for employee ID that returns self.id. And my apologies for all the typos, folks. And a setter as well for the same employee ID self. And this is actually a great example of how getters and setters can be useful. Because we could change the rest of our code, but is it worth it? And if we had even more code, it would be an even bigger problem. So fingers crossed that will work. And we might as well run our code one last time to make sure I can look up a student by ID. And we do have an issue here. Init requires a super, but received a string. So that sounds like something that is a typo, because super is in fact a function that we need to call that returns us the instance of a class. And if I list all the staff, I can see all the staff. And if I want to view a student 1, 3, 3, 4, 5, I can see a student. And so we in fact have now added inheritance. I think that takes us to the end of the lecture, and thank you for being patient with me, because I know we ran a bit long. So hopefully this was helpful. I would love to look at writing some tests for this. I think I just need to play that by ear in terms of sort of the afternoon and availability. Before we wrap up, I just want to check in to see any questions that folks have for us to cover. All right, awesome. Thank you, everyone.